Over the next 40 years, we need to generate more food than has been generated in the past 10,000 years put together to feed this planet. As I've said, what's needed isn't just food, it's nutritious food. Now, you're an agriculture company, you're a food company, you're committed to food, but I want to hear what you're doing with farmers that commits you to good nutrition and what that does for your bottom line.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here. I think it's very hard to separate the two. So you're right, we're going to have to grow a whole bunch more food in a short space of time. I used to say in the same footprint, but the reality is the footprint's shrinking as well. So it's how do you make more with less, more food with less inputs on a shrinking footprint? And I think the question of it's not just more but better is exactly the right conversation. So the new Sustainable Development Goals, number 2, is ending hunger.
Yay.
Increasing that one, that should be an applausible moment. Ending hunger.
Absolutely.
Driving food security and improving nutrition and increasing sustainability. And I think that's the right way to look at it. And for a long time, we've looked at these as separate, but they're all part of the same Rubik's Cube. So we do that through our breeding and our technology efforts. We are focusing now, not just in corn and soy, but also in veggies. And the 2 driving goals there are taste and nutrition. So I think increasingly this is about how you bring all that together, and how you help farmers help others deliver that nutritious, healthy plate. So
What are the veggies you're focusing on?
I
want to hear how nutritious they are.
The salad bowl of. So we're looking at leafy greens. We're looking at peppers. We are doing work in melons. Kind of a tour around the salad bowl, a little bit on root crops, but not as much. And for a long time, vegetables look fabulous and don't taste of anything. So we've been bringing science. It's not biotech, it's breeding, but we've been bringing breeding technology to improving taste and improving nutrition in veggie crops.
It's a good segue then to turn to Sylvia, because Harvest Plus works in developing innovative biofortified crops that are bringing extra power, nutrients, and food to people. So in Uganda, 1 out of 5 children have vitamin A deficiency, and that means they're at risk of going blind. It means that their immune systems aren't going to develop fully, and they're not going to be able to resist disease. So that's huge. Equally high numbers of women are anemic, so there are issues where vitamin A is needed, where iron is needed. And I think one of the great things about Harvest Plus is not only, as I look at the CEO sitting right in front of me, they not only make these fortified crops, but they prove that they work. So Sylvia, I'm going to put you on the spot. I know you've done a lot of research on reducing micronutrient malnutrition and how your products help prove it. Tell us the evidence base. Tell us first what you're doing, and then the evidence base so that you know you're having the impact you want.
Okay, thank you. What we're doing in Uganda is to disseminate the vitamin A-rich sweet potato and the high iron beans to families that can grow them and eat them. Those are the small holders. And we've done that for the last 5 years in this project, and we've reached almost 300,000 households. And we've heard from the mothers that their children are doing better. They're not falling sick as often, and even when it goes to going to school, they are performing much better. So we know that the evidence is there and that they're doing well. And there's been a lot of research that has been done that has shown that when you give a child, for example, a vitamin A-rich sweet potato, after, there was a study after 2 years, they were able to see that these children had more serum retinol, and that they were eating more of the orange sweet potato as compared to the white. There have been other studies on pearl millet, which is rich in iron, and high iron beans in Rwanda. And even for those ones, after 6 months, they've been able to see that there's been more hemoglobin in the blood of the children that have been eating the biofortified
So are you
foods.
seeing differences then in the communities? If more kids are going to school, there's greater education, they're not sick as much, are you seeing improvement economically in the communities?
Well, what we've seen so much more is that we've had the testimonies from the mothers. And the people that have been engaging in the biofortified crops are able to sell. We've all seen the differences in the economics as we've seen them having more money available. They've built houses, they've done more marketing, and there are many positive stories.
So that orange flesh sweet potato goes a long way.
Yes, it does go a long way. Thanks.
So turning to Marcus, I'm going to embarrass you. Youngest chef ever to receive a 3-star review from the New York Times. I read those reviews all the time, so that's pretty awesome. But now you're on to something very different. You're still thriving with your restaurants in New York City, but you launched something 4 years ago called 3 Goats in Ethiopia. How does that relate to how we know you in New York? How do they balance one another?
Well, I mean, first of all, being born in Ethiopia and looking at, always being connected to food, and maybe when you think about Ethiopia, a lot of people think about malnourished kids, but I'm here to say that we here can actually learn a lot about food and spirituality from countries like Uganda, India, and Ethiopia. Also, chefs' roles today is constantly changing, right? One of the major issues is that to solve this, it's not like a new company that we're starting with new bylaws. We actually have a lot of bad habits that were set up in the 19th and the 20th century. And now we're here to solve that in the 21st century. That's problematic because it means that old systems got to go away with a lot of invested people in that bad system. And then new ideas got to come together. And I feel like dialogues like this, where all stakeholders are really coming together, and you can't do this without chefs because we are the one that's going to make the food popular, which is both problematic but also an opportunity. And you can't do it without all the other stakeholders like government and private sector, and of course technology, because that's the way we're going to sort of upload it. And I think there's a couple of things that everyone in this room can do, and some of them are simple things, but I would say the first one is, the most important is that learn how to cook. If we can cooking is like a language. We wouldn't say to any kid, you don't have to speak a language. Learn how to cook. Because everything else falls.
I'm glad my husband's not here.
Well, I mean, and this is a little bit what my point is, because we lived in this caveman situation where, in certain parts of the world, the men are not cooking, and in certain parts of if everyone knows how to cook, start there. The second one is cook and eat based on a spiritual compass. And that is different for every person here, whether you're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Catholic, whatever it is. But if you eat based on a spiritual compass, it cleans up a lot of things.
Say more about what you mean by that.
Well, for example, I look at waste, food and waste. In America, we throw away about 37 to 40% of our food. But if you eat based on a spiritual compass, you would know what to do. And if you know how to cook, your second day and your third day meal would be just as delicious. And that would help a lot of other things, right? Versus just throwing it away. Knowing when to fast. Nobody is set up to have steak for lunch, big fish for dinner, and the next morning come up and do it again and again. You know what I mean? Our bodies are not built for this. And we've changed our eating habits dramatically over the last 20 years in the West. We changed them more probably than any other time in the history, and those sets up opportunities, but also problems when major countries and cultures are completely changing their eating habits. So, as a chef, we've been part of popularizing fish, for example. Well, that means different for, if you're a fisherman in Senegal and you don't own your water rights anymore, that also linked to, as we know, migration into Europe. So you cannot do this without the chefs, and we cannot do it without all the major stakeholders be invested and talking collectively together. And you need technology, you need government, you need private sector, and you know how to cook, and you know how to eat and cook based on a spiritual compass.
So I'm going to talk about a more positive shift then from the other end of the spectrum, thinking about Sylvia and Uganda and those families who probably aren't having 3 meals a day. Have you found that through your work, families are able to eat more often?
Yes, we have found that they are able to eat more often. The studies that have been found have found that they eat at least twice or 3 times a day. And since we're giving them the food that is high in micronutrients, we are seeing those differences in their families.
So we should blend how your families are eating and how most Americans are eating now, and we might end up with a nice nutrient-rich and right calorie-sized diet.
I'm not sure Americans can put themselves in that dialogue yet. We need to-
Hugh, you launched a commitment, I guess at the very first CGI annual meeting called Quality Seeds Access Partnership for Africa. Public-private partnership to build capacity for agricultural development, but it was more ambitious than that, wanted to fight hunger, reduce poverty. How's it going? What's gone well? What went wrong?
It's expanded a lot since the first CGI meeting, so it kind of morphed. The early work was really in seed donations, and I think the learning since then, and it kind of goes to the composition of the room. So our involvement today is much bigger, much broader, and much more collaborative. We're 6 or 7 years in now with a program with the Gates Initiative, with AATF, an NGO in Africa, funded by Bill and Melinda Gates and Howard Buffett. It's backstopped by USAID. And the idea behind it was to take drought-tolerant corn to Africa. So there's 2 places in the world to eat white corn, Mexico and Africa. They make porridge. So it was, how do you ensure the nutrition of that? How do you get the highest possible quality seed? And then in the long term, how do you make sure that that grain grows with less water? Because as climate change continues to take a grip, the cruelty in this is it affects already dry areas agriculture more dramatically than it does European or American agriculture. So the learning, and it started, so 2 or 3 learnings. It takes a long time. We're 7 years in. We're in South Africa, Kenya, Mozambique, and Tanzania. We are seeing our first seeds planted, but it's a long, slow, steady process because nature is a long, slow process, number one. Number two, it takes time to give gifts. And especially there's a question, so what's in it for you? And is this really a gift? And why are you doing this? And you're Monsanto? And just let's just talk about this one more time.
So what's in it for you?
We started this. Our goal in this was, in the day that we launched the first commercial drought-tolerant seeds in the US, we should be ready to see the same seeds, or the adapted seeds, planted at the same time in Africa. And if you look at the AIDS, the retroviral vaccines and so on, 20 years has passed between that technology gap. So the goal for us, this was philanthropic. Eventually it would become a business a long way down the line. But it was, how do you compress the timelines in these things and get some kind of democratization in technology? So we're a wee bit late, but we're nowhere near as late as if we'd started these things sequentially rather than running in parallel. But the biggest learning for me, that the rate limiting step in a lot of these things isn't the technology. The rate limiting step is collaboration and the strength of relationships. How do you work in some of these triangles? Companies can't do it on their own. Governments certainly can't do it on their own. And NGOs don't have the scale. They know the farmers, they can hold people's hands, but they don't have the scale to make it happen. And it's the conundrum in how you bring these 2 or 3 groups together. That's the joy and the challenge.
So both you and Marcus have talked about all the different factors involved. You've referred to climate change and the need for water. And Marcus, I know in your work in Ethiopia, you've acknowledged how important water is, not just because you need water to grow crops, but you need proper hygiene so kids don't get sick, get diarrhea, and lose all the nutrients. But You've gone then beyond food and nutrition to water, to education. That's huge. How are you
Well-
doing that?
Well, because, I mean, and being fortunate enough, my wife and I go down every year, and we just started to think about, these problems never sort of dissected. It's not one answer. It's not one problem. There's many answers and many problems that are linked together. So we boiled it down with three goals to be like focusing on water, clean water, focusing on food, and eventually also with ambition to go into education, because we felt that all of those three runs together. And Ethiopian kids knows a lot about these subjects. The willingness to learn is definitely there, and being educated there. When I spoke to my youngest sister, she just said to me, this is 10 years ago, she said to me, she was about 8, she said to me, Marcus, the reason why I have bad teeth is very simple, because all the water on this side of the river is dirty. So, and I can't walk over to the other side because it's a different tribe. But what American 8-year-old really actually knows those very complex issues. So learning about clean water, the willingness for the tribe to learn about it is there. What's very often missing is obviously technology, finance, and know-how on a higher level, right? So having one foot in the West and having one foot in Africa, I think we always think about how can we assist, how can we support, how can we broadcast this, how can we bring resources from here, and also in many fact know-how in terms of cooking, because it could also be about learning how to cook different things in the part. But so Three Goats, that I've learned a lot from this. We actually set up camp on the border between Somalia and Ethiopia, because it was the part of the country that no one got to. We want to work in most kids in Addis. If they're not fine, they're on their way, because there's a lot of attention on Addis, and it's a booming city at this point. But the area of no man's land between Somalia and Ethiopia, it's not. We also want to work in an area where it's not based on helping one religion or not. We want to have a freedom of religions versus picking an easier area. But another thing about this is also, what I think about is, it's simple to talk about Africa and over there. A lot of these issues are right in our neighborhood in this very city as well. And this in New York, really, I think, it's a great way to start, because if you can solve it here, in terms of food issues, it's actually a great model to take to DC, Detroit, Los Angeles, other places. And part of the reason why I opened Red Rooster in Harlem was because I wanted to change the footprint of dining, but I also want to start a larger dialogue, like, hey, it's fine to go to other parts of the world and say they have a problem, but we have exactly the same issue here in the West. And poverty hits food different in America versus it does in Ethiopia. If you're a poor kid in Ethiopia, maybe only twice a day, but you're actually, most of the time, eating better. And that sounds very strange. You're eating different things. Here, you might have cable TV, you might even have a cell phone, but your options of eating fresh vegetables and seasonal vegetables are much worse than it would be, for example, in Africa. So we are not excluded from how, although we, be a very wealthy nation, we have food issues right here, right now, that also we have to look at and take part in.
So, Hugh, you've got a global client base, and as a company, I've read that you pride yourselves on promoting a positive dialogue with those farmers who are your customers. So I want to know what you've heard in those dialogues. What is it that you've listened to? And of course, I want to ask you about GMO, whether they're asking for it, running from it.
So the first thing with farmers, we are, seed is something that seed doesn't truck, it doesn't travel well. It's a very local thing. So you sell it where you grow it. And when seed wakes up, when that tiny little shoot germinates, when it pops through the soil, it looks for the sun, and it knows how long it's got until the frost comes. So it's a smart little. In Scotland, they say it's a clever little beastie. It knows what it's doing. So we, as a result of that, our business is pretty much everywhere that we sell seed. So it's kind of, our footprint is global agriculture. And the fascinating thing about this is, and at first it's somewhat counterintuitive. There are many, many more similarities than differences between large and small farmers. They all worry about the same things. The general impact is different. So when you leave the US and you start traveling around the world, most farmers are women. Most small farmers are women. And in a small farm, if they make mistakes, if bad things happen, then somebody goes hungry. In big farms, when they make mistakes, the bank takes the farm. So the risk coefficient is actually greater with small farms, and as a result of that, they very often focus more intensely. So that's kind of the setup. What do farmers tell me? There's an increase in conversation. If you look at the voting base of farmers, they're usually a fraction of a % of the general population. In many parts of the world, people have left the land, they've moved downtown. And the people that are left are a very small percentage. In many parts of the world, they feel as if nobody understands what they do. They feel as if there's a real question now on where food comes from and the integrity of food. And they feel, I'd say, very often a little bit disenfranchised.
So how do you help? How do you help protect them or feel more secure?
Yeah, I don't know if, I was saying earlier about the triangle, I don't know if one company can do that. Here's the realization for me, and this has been the last 3 years, I think. And in many ways, it's why I'm on a panel like this. I would have argued for a long time, quite passionately, that we were a seed company. And as a seed company, our connection with a restaurant or with that end point in food was distant. The grower feels, just to connect it back to your question, the grower feels even more disconnected in many ways. The shift in my views in this is I think we are part of that chain. We're part of that chain. And what starts with a tiny wee seed that goes in the ground, whether it's somebody taking a sharp stick, making a hole, pushing one seed in and closing it, or it's 1,000 acres somewhere in the Midwest, there is an absolute connection.
Feel free to jump in, Marcus.
And for us, just to kind of round out the thought, the feedback from growers is I think growers are really, they have an appetite to be part of that connected chain as well. That's going to take time. For companies like mine, it's doing a lot more in explaining what we do, who we are, what that seed is, what we're breeding for, the fact that you can't truck seed and that seed's a living organism and it takes time. And so I think there's the good news is there's more interest in food than there's ever been. The challenge is it's a disaggregated chain and it takes time to get those messages connected all through.
And to have value on all the various parts of that chain.
That's right.
Yeah. So thinking of going to scale and meeting the needs, Sylvia, as I was preparing for this panel, I learned that one of Harvest Plus's goals is to have 15 million farming households growing and consuming biofortified nutritious food by 2020, which is around the corner. And by 2030, to be reaching 1 billion people. I hope you're not looking nervous. Those are goals from your headquarters. As I see it, there are two challenges. How are you going to get the people to grow all of those foods, to change what they might have been growing to grow these new biofortified crops? And how are you going to get them to consume what they're growing if they're new foods for them?
Thank you. Well, there are a number of things that we've been doing to see that the people actually grow and eat the biofortified crops. And I said that we've taken different kind of strategies for different crops. For the seed, we are engaging the seed companies, and these ones are multiplying up this seed. And we're also involved in a lot of advocacy at different levels, from the community, higher up to the leaders and the government. And we've seen that as we do that, some governments are actually taking it up. We've got the World Bank, for example, taking it back up in Uganda, and they are disseminating the crops to more households than we are reaching. We're also seeing that in Zambia, the seed companies have taken up the orange maize, and they've gone on to disseminate that as well. We find that, of course, there's some skepticism at the beginning because of different colors, but even as we do that, as we tell them that this is something that is good for your nutrition, and they see the differences, they're doing it. But, of course, there are questions on how we can reach the billions. But we've seen that even World Food Program is getting interested. We're seeing World Vision in Uganda, for example, is doing it in all their livelihood programs. So strategic partnerships are the way we're going to go to reach the billions.
So there's certainly been a through line here of the need for collaboration, bringing in different sectors, bringing in private, public, bringing in water, bringing in education. So if I look at each of you as representatives of Marcus restaurants and food industry, Hugh, agriculture, seed tech, corporate sector, Sylvia, biofortified food crops, kind of a lightning round before we hopefully trigger some conversation among the audience, and starting with Marcus. Truthfully, honestly, what wakes you up at 4 a.m? What's that biggest challenge that is just worrying you?
Well, I do think about the stuff that I just started with, getting more people to get engaged in cooking fully, because it would help so much if you have an engaged audience that would actually understand what you're talking about. And I do think about eating with a spiritual compass underneath there, but I also think about, you know, if it would be more of an even playing field, it would actually benefit the West more than it would benefit the third world, because, you know, the setup that we have here, higher, more people having, whether it's diabetes, obesity, or allergies, you know, if we would more and more, let's say if we would buy teff instead of white flour, gluten-free wouldn't be an issue. If we would cook with, again, cracked wheat versus not only, it's not that we're going to stop cooking with rice, but as an alternative. So we can actually look at the other part of the world as not just as an aid format, but actually as a platform of resource, and we can work with on an equal level, not just we're sending money, we're helping out, because no one wants a handout, but on an equal level in terms of marketing, sales. We actually on this end would be, again, because we're so far ahead with how we can spread the message. So I do think about these things. And when you're on ground, when you're there, you realize that the gaps are so big because there's not enough practitioners talking. It's not enough of all partners that should be on ground yet on ground. It's a lot of people from here that are sort of activating certain things. But I think forums also, people have to be on ground to fully understand the culture difference, the transportation difference, and the spiritual differences.
Sounds like a tall order. All right. Sylvia, 4 a.m. You wake up, what's on your mind?
Well, so many things. First of all, there's the need for more research, even as we are disseminating these crops. And so we think about, will we have enough donors to really buy in and give the money to do all these things that we're working on?
That's what wakes me up at 4 a.m.
Then there's also the fact that some of our crops are very similar to the other crops that are not biofortified. For example, the beans, you can't tell the differences. So you begin to think, how will we tell the difference to the communities? And when people mix them up, how will we make sure that when we brand them, they won't reopen those packages and mix them again? So there's that kind of fear. Then there's also keeping the momentum. Many times, some of the private sector people wonder how good this is going to work out, and they may not be wanting to pay the money they should pay. And so making sure that this momentum is kept on till the very end, that wakes me up in the morning.
All right, she's referred to those private sector people, so you're 4 a.m.
So I'm a quintessential optimist. So I wake at 4 a.m, the same as everybody does, but the danger in these kind of panels and these conversations is doom and gloom, we're never going to make it. You know, you wake up gasping, you know, sleep apnea of terror. You know, I'm the opportunity is there, the challenges are significant, but if we work together, so I'm optimistic. The challenges, so I think it's great that goal number 2 is end hunger, drive food security and nutrition, and do it all sustainably. I think that's the right goal. The 4 a.m. moment is by 2030. That's 15 harvests away. The Northern Hemisphere's harvesting right now. Then it'll be 14 harvests from now. So the key for that in groups like this, and it's kind of the privilege of Monsanto, it's kind of we're talking about big farmers and small farmers. If we continue to focus on our differences, 14 harvests will pass in a heartbeat. And for this community, the challenge is, how do you lay aside the perceived differences and say, where's the middle ground? Because I don't think the barrier is going to be a technological one, the barrier is going to be, it's exactly Marcus's point, it's the heart, it's the societal piece, it's how do you come together and try and crack the code in that. That's the piece that worries me more, is if you get 14 harvests, how are we going to figure that out? And then the other piece is, if we did a straw poll in here, I think I could guess. But I remember not too long ago, you'd say, how many people in the room believe in climate change? And well, I know, we're on this. But it isn't too long ago that the room would be half and half. And I can take you to rooms where it's still half and half. The thing about these 14 harvests is, it's a big enough task if everything else was equal, but it's going to get warmer, dustier, thirstier, drier. So the clock's running on two vectors. It's 14 springs and 14 harvests, but it's going to get a smidgen warmer and more inhospitable, and also a bit more crowded. So having said that, I've been in so many of these things, and everybody said, the water's up to you, and you said, we're never going to make it. There is a way through this. We're just going to have to get our act together on how we work better together.